The first time she saw him, he was crawling, barely breathing, barely alive. The boy's skin was crusted with blood and dirt, his leg twisted at an awful angle, and an arrow buried deep into his tiny shoulder. He couldn't speak, but his wide, terrified eyes screamed louder than any words ever could. Eleanor McBride, a widow living on the edge of nowhere, had never seen a native child up close. Not like this. Not broken. Not bleeding. She stood in the doorway of her cabin, her breath caught in her throat. The boy had made it to the edge of her yard, dragging himself through dust and thorn. This was 1871. The rules of the West were cruel. Helping a native could get you killed. Whispers of war always hung in the air, and even a simple act of kindness could spark violence. She could have left him. Her late husband's shotgun rested just inside the door. She could have used it. No one would question her if they found his body at the tree line, but something in her heart cracked when she saw him reach toward her well, his fingers trembling, his lips too dry to call for help. She stepped forward slowly, then knelt. His body flinched. "It's all right," she whispered, her voice soft as cotton. "I won't hurt you." His eyes fluttered. He was fading. Without another thought, she lifted him into her arms. He was light, terribly light, as if hunger had already begun to eat him alive. She carried him into her cabin, blood dripping from his wounds and soaking into the floorboards. No one must know, she told herself. This was between her, God, and the boy. That night, she didn't sleep. She boiled herbs, tore her old linens into strips, and bathed his wounds with water warmed on the fire. He burned with fever. He cried, in his sleep. He never spoke. When morning came, his eyes opened, glazed but alive. And the first thing he did was reach for her hand. He touched her wedding ring. Eleanor felt something strange in her chest, something she hadn't felt since her husband died. Not fear, not guilt. Something like purpose. She had no idea that saving him would change everything, that in the years to come, shadows would return to her doorstep, warriors on horseback holding a blood-soaked blanket and calling her name. And if you're new here, subscribe for more stories that stay with your heart long after the tale ends. Eleanor sat beside the boy through the morning, her hand gently resting on his brow. He was no longer burning, but a soft sweat glistened on his skin like dew. The arrow had come out clean. She'd cut it free with shaking hands, praying the whole time she wasn't making it worse. The boy hadn't spoken a word, not even a grunt of pain. But every now and then, his dark eyes opened just enough to meet hers, and each time, he looked less like a stranger and more like a child she was meant to protect. By afternoon, she managed to get some broth down his throat. He didn't resist. There was something holy about his silence. Not fear, not distrust, but something deeper. As if he was carrying a story too heavy for words. She hadn't realized how long she'd gone without company. Her husband, Nathaniel, had died 2 winters ago. His lungs turned to stone from the fever. Since then, it was just her and the wind. But now, there was breath in her cabin again. And though it came from a wounded native boy with no name, it felt like the house had come back to life. That night, Eleanor heard the first whisper. It wasn't the boy. He was asleep, curled beneath a blanket she had sewn years ago, the one with blue flowers. It was outside, a branch snapped, then another. She rose slowly, careful not to make the floor creak. She reached for her shotgun, the one Nathaniel left, behind. Through the crack in the door, she saw it, movement in the trees, shadows tall and wide. Someone was watching the cabin. Her blood went cold. She blew out the lantern and crouched near the window, her breath shallow, her heart pounding, like a drum. She counted 2 figures, maybe 3, all on foot. They didn't come closer, just watched. After what felt like forever, they faded into the dark. She stayed awake till dawn, shotgun in her lap. When the sun finally broke through the hills, She stepped outside. Nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no signs of anyone. But when she returned inside, something had changed. The boy was sitting up. He looked at her, not with fear, but with urgency. And then, for the first time, he spoke. His voice was soft, ragged. One word. Run. Eleanor froze in place. That one word, run, echoed through the small wooden cabin like a thunderclap. The boy's lips were dry and trembling, his breath shallow, but his eyes, they were wide open, filled with something between terror and warning. Run? She whispered, crouching beside him. Run from what? He didn't answer, just stared at the door, his tiny fingers digging into the quilt. Is someone coming? She asked, again softer this time. He slowly nodded, her spine stiffened. The shadow in the trees last night hadn't been a dream. It wasn't just a coincidence. Someone had followed him. Eleanor glanced at the shotgun leaning near the fireplace. It had only 2 shells left. If this was what she thought it was, a search party, or worse, a hunting party, she wouldn't last 5 minutes. But something didn't add up. He was a child, wounded, starving, near death. Why chase him across the prairie unless he'd seen something? Or worse, he knew something. She knelt beside him again. What's your name, child? He hesitated, then shook his head. You can't remember? He looked at her, this time with guilt. Then he reached into the bundle of tattered cloth tied at his waist and pulled out something wrapped in hide. He handed it to her. Eleanor carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a necklace, silver and bone, braided with dark hair, unlike anything she'd seen before. But what made her heart stop wasn't the necklace itself. It was the medallion tied at the end, a small iron coin with English letters etched in. She wiped the surface with her thumb and gasped. N. McB. Nathaniel McBride, her dead husband's initials. She stared at the boy, eyes wide, heart hammering. Where did you get this? He looked down. Eleanor's world tilted. This wasn't just a lost child. He had something that had never left this cabin. Eleanor couldn't move. The medallion in her palm weighed more than iron. It carried a ghost. N. McB., she whispered again. Her husband's initials. The same medallion she'd buried with him, sealed inside his coffin with trembling hands. She remembered placing it on his chest before the lid closed. She remembered the frost that day, the way the gravedigger's boots slipped on the frozen ground. There was no way, no logical way this child could have it. The boy sat silent, eyes heavy with something deeper than grief. Like he wanted to speak, but feared what the words would do once spoken. Did you know him? Eleanor finally asked, sitting beside him. He didn't respond, just stared into the fire. And then, in a voice barely louder than the wind through the cracks in the cabin walls, he said, He wasn't buried. Eleanor's breath caught. What? He burned. The boy blinked. Everything burned. The cabin, the horses, the man inside. Her lips parted, but no sound came. This boy was describing something only she and Nathaniel had known. The hunting cabin, 2 days' ride north, where Nathaniel kept his old maps and trapping gear. The place they never spoke of after the fever. Came. Eleanor stood, heart pounding. That fire happened 3 months ago. The boy nodded, her throat tightened. How do you know that? Were you there? The boy looked away. She knelt in front of him, gripping his shoulders. Tell me, child, did you see who set that fire? Tears welled in his eyes. And then, through cracked lips, he whispered, I lit it. Eleanor recoiled as if struck. What? What are you saying? He sobbed once, a deep, gut-wrenching cry. He was already dead. They told me to, said no one could know. A long silence followed. Only the fire dared to crackle. She rose slowly, her world unraveling. If what he said was true, then Nathaniel hadn't died of fever. He'd been murdered, and burned to cover it up. But who were they? And why would a child obey such a command? The wind howled against the walls. Outside, the crows circled over the prairie like black omens, and in that moment, Eleanor understood something she hadn't dared to admit until now. This boy hadn't just come to her by chance. He had been sent, not to harm her, but to reveal a truth buried deeper than her husband's grave. Eleanor stared at the boy as if seeing him for the first time, a child soaked in ash and secrets, a voice that trembled with guilt older than his age. "You lit the fire?" she repeated, barely able to comprehend it. The boy nodded, wiping his cheeks with the back of his dirty hand. "They told me to do it, said it was the only way no one would look for him." Her heart twisted. "Who are they?" He hesitated, then spoke, slowly, like each word was a stone in his mouth. Two men. One had a scar across his eye. The other wore a badge that wasn't his. A chill went down Eleanor's spine. A fake badge? In these parts, only one kind of man wore stolen authority. Land thieves and railway enforcers pretending to be U.S. Marshals. She'd heard the whispers in town, how families near the border were being run off their land, their homes burned, their names erased from records, and her Nathaniel had been a mapmaker. Someone who knew where the unclaimed valleys lay, who owned what, and where the railroad wanted to run. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "You said he was already dead when you got there," she asked carefully. The boy nodded. Again. "I saw blood on his mouth, and a paper clenched in his fist. They made me take it." "Where is it now?" she asked quickly. The boy looked toward the bundle of rags again, but this time he didn't reach in. His eyes darted toward the small trapdoor beneath the floorboards. One Eleanor hadn't touched since last winter. "I hid it there. I didn't want them to find it if they came back." Eleanor immediately crossed the cabin, heart racing, and pried the boards loose. A single oilskin envelope lay beneath, charred at the corners but sealed tight. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a crude map, not of gold, not of silver mines, but of land parcels, government land, with markings, crosses, names, Nathaniel's handwriting scrawled across the bottom. "They're forging deeds, killing anyone who remembers." Eleanor's breath caught. He'd uncovered something huge, and he'd paid for it with his life. She looked at the boy. What's your name?" He paused. For the first time, something close to trust flickered in his eyes. "They call me Ash." She blinked. Not a name, a reminder. A child of fire and secrets, a ghost witness carrying the truth Nathaniel had died for, and just then, the sound of a distant hoofbeat echoed through the cold prairie. Slow, deliberate. Someone was coming, but not just anyone, someone who knew where to find Ash. The hoofbeats grew louder, like thunder rolling across the plain. Eleanor stepped back from the window, pulling Ash behind her. The cabin's lantern cast flickering shadows, dancing like ghosts across the wooden walls. "Go to the trapdoor," she whispered. "Don't make a sound unless I call you." Ash obeyed without question, slipping into the shadows as if he'd done it 100 times before. She grabbed her late husband's rifle from above the mantel. It hadn't been fired in months, but it was still clean. Loaded. Outside, a silhouette emerged. Tall, broad, wearing a long black duster and a weather-beaten hat that covered most of his face. He rode a chestnut mare, slow and steady, like he wasn't afraid of anything, or anyone. Eleanor's finger tightened on the trigger. The man dismounted. Didn't knock, didn't shout, just stood there, as if he knew she was watching. Then, without warning, he reached into his coat. Eleanor raised the rifle, heart pounding in her ears, but he didn't pull a weapon. He pulled a letter, held it up with 2 fingers. Let the lantern light catch the seal, the exact same wax emblem as the map Ash had hidden. Her breath hitched. She didn't lower the rifle, but she opened the door 2 inches. "Who are you?" she asked. The man looked up, and for the first time she saw his face, rough jawline, silver stubble, and eyes like scorched earth. "I was Nathaniel's partner," he said. The world tilted. Eleanor nearly dropped the gun. "That's impossible. Nathaniel didn't have a partner." "He did," the man replied. "He just didn't tell you. To protect you." She swallowed hard. Her grip loosened. He held out the letter. "He told me if anything happened to him, I'd know where to find the boy. And the map." She hesitated, then reached for the letter, never lowering the rifle. The seal broke with a soft crack. Inside, a single sentence in her husband's handwriting. "If you're reading this, I didn't die alone." Eleanor's knees weakened. The man stepped forward. "There's more, Eleanor, much more. And if we don't move fast, they'll be back." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" He looked her straight in the eye. "The one man they couldn't kill." Inside the trapdoor, Ash heard every word. And for the first time since the fire, he felt something new. Hope. The man in the black hat stepped into the cabin, his boots heavy with dust and distance. Eleanor still hadn't moved from the door. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed it behind him. He looked around, eyes scanning. The room like a soldier checking for traps. Same old pine walls, same table Nathaniel built, same worn rug. But something had changed. "Where's the boy?" he asked. Eleanor hesitated. "Safe. For now." The man didn't push further. He removed his hat, revealing a scar that ran from his left brow to his cheek. It didn't look fresh, but it hadn't faded either. A wound earned and remembered. "They think the boy died in the fire," he said. "That's our only advantage." Eleanor crossed her arms. "You still haven't told me your name." He looked at her for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "Colt." She blinked. "Like the revolver?" He gave a tired smile. "Named after it, born with one, lived by one." She didn't smile back. Instead, she moved to the mantel and placed Nathaniel's rifle back. "You said you rode with my husband. Prove it." Colt reached into his coat again and this time pulled out a tiny wooden token, about the size of a coin. Eleanor gasped. She recognized it instantly. The puzzle piece. Nathaniel used to carve them. He said when the right people found each other, they'd know, because their pieces would fit. Colt held out his token. "Nathaniel said we'd each carry one. That way, if anything ever happened, you'd know who to trust." With shaking fingers, Eleanor pulled her own from the drawer by the hearth. She fitted into Colt's piece, and it locked perfectly, without a sliver of space. It was real. Colt looked toward the floorboards. "I need to see the map," he said. "If they're doing what we think they're doing, they'll burn down. Every ranch from here to the border to cover it up." Eleanor stepped aside. Ash slowly climbed up from the trapdoor, his eyes darting to the stranger. "It's all right," she said gently. "He's one of us." Ash clutched the map tight in his small hands before passing it to Colt. Colt unrolled it over the table, pressing down the corners. He studied it silently. "Your husband was smarter than all of us," he murmured. "This ain't just land they're stealing. It's railroad timing. He figured out the exact weeks before the government surveyors were supposed to arrive." Eleanor's breath caught. "They're faking ownership claims, wiping out the real owners. And by the time officials show up, they'll have proof they bought it all legal." Colt tapped the biggest red cross on the map. "This is where it ends. Black Hollow Ridge. That's where they're headquartered. And if I'm right, it's also where your husband died." Ash looked up. "You're going there?" Colt nodded. Eleanor stepped forward. "Then I'm going too." He shook his head. "It's not a place for a woman." She didn't flinch. "And this isn't a life for a boy, but here we are." Their eyes locked, two people with no reason left to run, only reasons to fight. Colt nodded slowly. "All right then. Saddle up." The sun dipped low, bleeding orange across the prairie as Eleanor and Colt saddled their horses outside the cabin. Ash watched silently, clutching the small wooden token, his eyes wide with unspoken fear and hope. "This is the last quiet moment we'll have," Colt said, tightening the reins. Eleanor nodded, her jaw set. "We can't wait. If they're burning homes and forging deeds, Every second counts. As they rode out, the wind carried the scent of smoke, thin but real like a warning. The trail to Black Hollow Ridge was rough, lined with twisted trees that seemed to whisper secrets. Colt kept glancing behind, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Those men with the scar and the fake badge won't wait for us to come knocking," he said grimly. Eleanor gripped her saddle horn. "Then we'll make sure they regret every step." They reached the edge of the ridge just as dusk swallowed the sky. Black Hollow was a scar on the landscape, charred trees, collapsed cabins, and fences torn down. A sign hung crooked on a gatepost. "Private property, no trespassing." Colt dismounted silently, his boots crunching on ash and gravel. "Stay. Close," he whispered to Eleanor and Ash. They crept forward, shadows among shadows. Suddenly, a dog barked, a harsh warning cry that split the silence. From the darkness, figures emerged, armed men with cold eyes. Colt's hand went to his revolver. Eleanor's. Heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "We're not here to fight. Yet. But we're not leaving without answers." One of the men, the scar-faced one from Ash's story, stepped forward. "We've been expecting you," he said, voice like gravel. Colt met his gaze without flinching. "Good, because we're about to end this." The night air was thick, heavy with the scent of smoke and danger. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the reins, her knuckles white beneath worn leather gloves. Colt's eyes scanned every flicker of shadow, every twitch in the trees. Ash stayed, close to Eleanor, the small wooden token hidden safely beneath his shirt. The scar-faced man and his men circled them slowly, like wolves testing a wounded deer. One stepped forward, voice low and cruel. "You think you can just ride into Black Hollow Ridge and demand answers? You're fools." Colt's hand hovered near his revolver but didn't draw. "I'm no fool, but I'm the one who'll see justice done." Eleanor swallowed fear and took a step forward. "Tell us what happened to my husband." The scar-faced man laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Nathaniel tried to stop us, tried to warn folks about the land swindle. We took care of him." Eleanor's heart slammed. "You killed him?" The man nodded slowly. "We did, but we didn't count on him leaving a trail. Or you having this." He glanced at the tokens. "Those wooden pieces mean more than you think." Colt's gaze sharpened. "Explain." The man smirked. "Those pieces connect you to a secret, one Nathaniel was part of before he died. A group fighting to reclaim stolen land. We're the ones hunting them down." Eleanor's eyes widened. The stakes were higher than she imagined. "We're not running anymore," she said, voice steady. "If you want a war, you'll get one." Suddenly, a shot cracked through the night. Chaos erupted. Colt dove to shield Ash while Eleanor fired back. The crackle of gunfire echoed under the stars. In the confusion, Eleanor caught a glimpse of a shadow fleeing toward the trees. "After him!" Colt shouted. The night had turned into a battle for survival, and the fight for truth was just beginning. The sharp echo of Colt's voice cut through the chaos. "After him!" Eleanor's heart pounded like a drum in her chest as she kicked her horse forward, eyes locked on the fleeing shadow disappearing into the dense woods. Ash clung to the saddle tightly, fear mixed with determination in his young eyes. Branches whipped past them as the trio galloped deeper into the darkness, where moonlight barely touched the earth. The scent of smoke and gunpowder hung heavy in the cold night air, mingling with the damp earth smell. Colt's breath came out in ragged bursts. "He's fast, but we're faster." Eleanor forced herself to focus, the weight of Nathaniel's death burning behind her eyes. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, for her husband, her son, and everyone the villains had wronged. Suddenly, the fleeing figure stumbled, crashing into a tangle of brambles. Colt was there in an instant, pulling the man upright by the collar. The man's face was obscured by dirt and shadow, but Eleanor recognized the cold glint in his eyes. "Who sent you?" Colt demanded. The man spat blood. "You don't understand! They're planning more than just land theft. They want control, the railroads, towns, everything. Nathaniel was the first obstacle. But he won't be the last. Eleanor stepped forward, voice fierce. Tell us who they are. The man hesitated, pain and fear warring in his gaze. Look to the east, at the abandoned fort near the river, he gasped. That's where the real power lies. Before Colt could say another word, the man twisted sharply, breaking free and darting back into the woods. Damn, Colt cursed, scanning the shadows. Eleanor's mind raced. The abandoned fort. No one had been there for years. But if the villains had taken it over... This changes everything, she whispered. Ash looked up at her. What do we do now? Eleanor's eyes burned with a new resolve. We prepare. Tomorrow, we ride to that fort. We find the truth and... We end this. The sharp echo of Colt's voice cut through the chaos. After him! Eleanor's heart pounded like a drum in her chest as she kicked her horse forward, eyes locked on the fleeing shadow disappearing into the dense woods. Ash clung to the saddle tightly, fear and determination mingling in his young eyes. The night was cold, the moon a thin crescent barely lighting their path. Every snapped twig and rustling leaf made Eleanor's nerves jump, but she forced herself to push on. Nathaniel's death was no longer just a painful memory. It was the fuel driving her forward. Branches whipped past them as the trio galloped deeper into the darkness, the forest closing in around them like a living trap, the smell of smoke mixed with damp earth and the faint hint of gunpowder lingering in the air. Colt's breath came in ragged bursts, his eyes sharp and unyielding. He's fast, but we're faster, he said through gritted teeth. Suddenly, a figure stumbled, crashing into a tangle of brambles and fallen leaves. Colt didn't hesitate. With the agility of a seasoned hunter, he threw himself off his horse and tackled the man to the ground, pinning him down. The man's face was smeared with dirt and blood, his eyes wild and frantic in the pale moonlight. Who sent you? Colt demanded, voice low and threatening. The man spat blood onto the cold ground, grimacing with pain. You don't understand. They're planning more than just land theft, he gasped. They want control. The railroads, the towns, everything. Nathaniel was just the first obstacle, but he won't be the last. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice fierce and steady despite the fear twisting inside her. Tell us who they are. The man hesitated, the fight draining out of him as he glanced toward the distant horizon where the faint outline of an old fort could be seen, shadowed against the night sky. Look to the east, at the abandoned fort near the river, he whispered hoarsely. That's where the real power lies. The mastermind behind this. He's waiting there. Colt's grip tightened on the man's collar, urgency flashing in his eyes. Name him. We can't fight ghosts. The man's lips trembled. His name is Graves. Thomas Graves. Former army captain turned ruthless land baron. He's got more men, more weapons, and more cunning than you can imagine. Nathaniel stood in his way. Now you're next. Before Colt could say another word, the man twisted sharply, breaking free from his grasp and darting back into the woods with surprising speed for someone so wounded. Damn! Colt cursed, scanning the shadows as the man vanished among the trees. Eleanor's mind raced. Graves. The name stirred a cold chill down her spine. Rumors of his cruel dealings, the disappearances of anyone who crossed him, and his iron grip on the region's resources had circulated for years. But she never thought the threat would come this close. Ash, eyes wide and breath uneven, looked up at Eleanor. What do we do now? Her jaw clenched as she stared into the darkness, her resolve hardening like steel forged in fire. We prepare. Tomorrow at first light we ride to that fort. We find Graves and his men, and we put an end to this nightmare. The campfire flickered behind them, casting long shadows over the hollow where the fight for justice had only just begun. The night swallowed their figures as they turned back toward the cabin, but Eleanor knew this was only the calm before the storm. The first light of dawn crept slowly over Black Hollow Ridge, casting pale gold across the rugged terrain. Eleanor stood outside the cabin, the cold morning air biting at her cheeks, her eyes scanning the distant horizon toward the abandoned fort by the river. Ash was beside her, clutching a worn leather satchel filled with supplies and the small wooden tokens Nathaniel had left behind. Colt moved restlessly, loading rifles and checking cartridges, his jaw tight with determination. "We don't have much time," Colt said, breaking the heavy silence. "Graves won't wait for us to be ready. If he's planning something bigger, we're walking into a hornet's nest." Eleanor nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. For months, she had lived in grief and fear. But now, every step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of her life stolen by ruthless men. "Tell me everything you know about this fort," she said, turning to Colt. He glanced at her, eyes sharp. "It's an old military post, abandoned for years, located right where the river bends sharply, perfect for guarding the land routes. No one's been there in a long time, but rumors say Graves set up his operations there. His men are likely armed and waiting." Ash listened carefully, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. "Do you think we can win?" Eleanor forced a small smile, resting a hand on his shoulder. "We don't have a choice. We fight because no one else will." As the sun rose higher, they packed their horses with provisions, dried meat, gunpowder, extra bullets, and the few precious mementos Eleanor carried of Nathaniel. Before leaving, Eleanor took a moment at the small grave marker near the cabin, a simple wooden cross weathered by time. "Dad," she whispered, "I'm coming for you. We'll make things right." The ride to the fort was tense and quiet. The path was rugged, winding through dense trees and over rocky hills. Every rustle in the underbrush made them flinch. Every distant howl sent chills down their spines. Colt kept his hand near his revolver, his eyes sharp for any sign of danger. Hours passed before they reached the edge of the clearing where the fort stood, a dilapidated stone structure, half swallowed by creeping vines and moss. The heavy wooden gates hung crookedly, the metal hinges rusted and silent. Eleanor dismounted slowly, her gaze locked on the fortress that held the answers she so desperately needed. "This is it," Colt said softly. "Where Graves waits." The air grew heavier, the silence more oppressive as they crept closer, senses alert. Suddenly a sharp noise cracked, a twig snapping underfoot. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, gun raised. "Stop right there," a voice commanded, low, cold, and deadly. Eleanor's heart skipped. The fight had begun. The sharp crack of a twig echoed through the heavy silence like a gunshot. Eleanor froze, her breath caught in her throat. The rough stone walls of the abandoned fort towered around them, but the cold shadow at the gate was a stark reminder. This wasn't a forgotten place anymore. A tall figure stepped forward, a gun leveled steadily at their group. The man's face was partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but his cold, calculating eyes glinted in the dim morning light. "Who are you? And what business do you have here?" His voice was low, clipped, the voice of a man who had given orders, not taken them. Colt's hand hovered near his revolver, fingers twitching with readiness, but Eleanor raised a steadying hand. "We're here for Thomas Graves," she said clearly. "We know what he's planning, and we're here to stop him." The man's gaze flicked to Ash, then back to Eleanor, his expression unreadable. "You're brave to walk into Graves's territory without fear." "We have no fear left," Eleanor replied, her voice unwavering. "Only justice." A flicker of something like respect, or maybe curiosity, passed through the man's eyes. He gestured to the gate behind him. "Then, come inside, but don't think for a moment this will be easy." The heavy wooden gates creaked as they pushed open, revealing a courtyard littered with rusted tools, broken carts, and the remnants of a once active outpost. Shadows moved in the corners, silent figures, watching, waiting. Eleanor's pulse quickened. The tension was thick as smoke, the sense of danger almost tangible. "Keep your eyes open," Colt whispered. They moved carefully, the crunch of their boots on gravel loud in the eerie stillness. Suddenly, a shout erupted from the far side of the courtyard. "Ambush!" Colt shouted, drawing his revolver. From the shadows, men in dust-covered clothes sprang forward, rifles aimed, ready to fire. Eleanor's heart hammered as she dove behind a crumbling wall, gun drawn. Ash scrambled beside her, wide-eyed but steady. Gunfire erupted, sharp and chaotic, the crack of rifles mingling with shouted commands and curses. Colt fired with deadly precision, covering their retreat as they ducked through the maze of ruined buildings. The fight was brutal, but brief. Graves's men weren't expecting resistance, and after a few tense minutes, the attackers retreated into the shadows, leaving only silence behind. Breathing hard, Eleanor looked around, her eyes burning with fierce determination. "We've made our stand," she said, voice trembling but strong. "But this is only the beginning." Ash nodded, gripping his rifle tightly. "We'll finish what Nathaniel started." The weight of their mission pressed heavier than ever. Eleanor knew Graves wouldn't rest until every last one of them was crushed, but neither would she. The echo of fading gunfire still hummed in Eleanor's ears as the dust settled over the abandoned fort. She wiped sweat and grime from her brow, her heart pounding fiercely with a mix of adrenaline and dread. The brief but brutal skirmish had confirmed one thing. Graves's men were desperate and dangerous, but their desperation meant they were vulnerable too. Colt was already scanning the ruined buildings, his keen eyes searching for any sign of the enemy or clues about Graves's true plans. "We can't wait for them to come back," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing on her limbs. "We have to find out what Graves is hiding here." Ash nodded, clutching his rifle tightly. "Nathaniel mentioned something about secret tunnels beneath the fort. Maybe that's where the real threat lies." Eleanor's mind raced. The old military post was built with defense in mind, she knew. Secret passageways and hidden rooms weren't uncommon in such places, especially near a river bend where ambushes were likely. The three of them moved cautiously deeper into the fort's heart, their footsteps echoing off cracked stone walls and broken wooden beams. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay, but beneath it all, Eleanor thought she could smell something else. Smoke? Oil? The faint metallic tang of gunpowder? Suddenly, Ash stopped short, his eyes fixed on a narrow stone staircase, partially hidden behind a fallen beam. "Look," he whispered. This wasn't meant to be seen. Eleanor knelt and brushed aside rubble to reveal worn stone steps descending into darkness. She reached for a lantern hanging nearby, lighting it with a flick of a match. A cold draft wafted upward, carrying with it the faint sound of dripping, water, and the unmistakable hum of muffled voices. "Stay close," Eleanor warned, leading the way down into the unknown. The stairs spiraled down into a network of tunnels carved deep beneath the fort. The walls were slick with moisture, and every footstep echoed eerily in the confined space. After several tense minutes, they reached a heavy iron door, rusted but clearly reinforced. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit room cluttered with crates, maps, and stacks of weapons. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the documents pinned to a nearby board, plans for railroad expansions, land, acquisitions, and a chilling list of names marked for removal. "This is it," Colt muttered, voice low and harsh. "Graves isn't just taking land. He's erasing anyone who stands in his way." Eleanor's blood ran cold. The magnitude of the conspiracy was greater than she had imagined. Suddenly, footsteps approached from the tunnel behind them. The three spun around, weapons drawn, hearts pounding. From the shadows stepped a figure, older, weathered, with eyes full of bitterness and regret. "Looking for answers?" the man said, voice rough. Eleanor's grip tightened on her rifle. "Who are you?" He hesitated, then sighed deeply. "Name's Harris. I used to work for Graves. I've seen the darkness behind his empire, and if you want to survive, you'll need allies." The dim light flickered against the damp stone walls as Harris stepped fully into the lantern's glow. His face was lined with years of hardship and regret, eyes clouded but determined. "I've lived in Graves's shadow for too long," he said quietly. "Watched him destroy everything in his path, families, towns, futures. I turned my back when I could no longer stomach it. But now you're here. Maybe this is the chance to end it." Eleanor studied the man carefully. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, but something in his tone rang true. "Why help us now?" she asked, her voice steady but wary. Harris swallowed hard. "Because if Graves wins, no one will be safe. He's planning something bigger than land grabs or threats. He's building an army, mercenaries, outlaws, anyone who'll follow him blindly. And soon, he'll move to take control of the whole valley." Ash shifted uneasily, gripping his rifle tighter. "Why didn't you stop him sooner?" "I was scared," Harris admitted, voice low. "Afraid for my family. Graves has eyes everywhere." Colt stepped forward, eyes sharp. "Then you know the weaknesses. Tell us what you've seen." Harris nodded, running a hand through his thinning hair. "His base isn't just the fort. There's a hidden camp a few miles east near the old mine shafts. That's where his mercenaries train and prepare. They come and go under the cover of night. Graves himself rarely shows his face, but his orders come through that camp." Eleanor's mind raced. This was bigger than she had imagined, and time was slipping through her fingers. "We need to act fast," she said. "If Graves builds that army, no one stands a chance." Harris pulled out a worn map, edges frayed. "I can guide you there, but it's dangerous. Heavily guarded, traps set for anyone foolish enough to get close." Colt looked at Eleanor. "Are you ready for this?" She met his gaze firmly. "More than ever." Together they began planning their next move, a daring raid to strike at the heart of Graves's power before it was too late. As the night deepened outside, a cold wind whispered through the tunnels, a reminder that the battle was just beginning. The dim lantern cast wavering shadows over the damp, cold stone walls of the hidden tunnel. Harris's weathered face was lit unevenly, his eyes shadowed but burning with a mixture of regret and resolve. Eleanor studied him closely, searching for any sign of deception, but saw only a tired man haunted by his past. "I've carried this burden for years," Harris began, voice rough but steady. "Working for Graves meant keeping my mouth shut, seeing good people crushed under his heel. But when I learned about his plans for the valley, the full scale of what he wants to do, I couldn't stay silent any longer." Eleanor's heart tightened. She had seen evil before, but Graves's ambition chilled her to the core. "What exactly is he planning?" she asked. Harris took a deep breath, glancing nervously toward the tunnel entrance as if expecting shadows to creep closer. "It's worse than you think. Graves isn't just after land or money. He's building an army, a ruthless force made up of mercenaries, thieves, and outlaws, men who answer only to him. They're training near the old mine shafts to the east under cover of darkness." Colt's jaw clenched, eyes narrowing. "How many are we talking about?" "Hundreds. Maybe more," Harris replied grimly. "And Graves's reach stretches far beyond this fort. He's got spies in every town and every saloon. People are too scared to speak out." Ash shifted uneasily, gripping his rifle tighter. "Why didn't you stop him before?" Harris's gaze fell. "Fear. Graves has ruined families, burned homes, even killed those who dared oppose him. I had a wife and children to protect. I convinced myself it was safer to stay quiet. But when I saw what you're trying to do, I knew I had to help." Eleanor stepped forward, determination blazing in her eyes. "We can't let Graves continue. If we don't act soon, the whole valley will be under his control." Harris nodded. "I know the terrain. I can guide you to the camp. But be warned, it's heavily guarded, and traps surround the area. Only the desperate or the foolish come close." Colt exchanged a look with Eleanor. "We don't have a choice. We need to strike before Graves's army is fully ready." Eleanor's mind raced as they pored over the map Harris produced, marked with secret paths, guard rotations, and weak points in the camp's defenses. Every detail was a thread they could pull to unravel Graves's grip on the valley. As the night deepened, the flickering lantern light seemed to burn away the darkness, not just in the tunnel, but in their hearts. Hope was a fragile thing in a place like this, but tonight it burned brighter than ever. "We move at dawn," Eleanor said, voice low but fierce. "This ends before Graves can raise his army." Harris smiled faintly, a spark of the man he used to be returning. Good, because the valley needs a new dawn. The cold wind outside whispered through the cracks, carrying with it the promise of battle, and the price they would pay for freedom. The first light of dawn barely touched the horizon as Eleanor, Colt, Ash, and their unlikely guide Harris crept through the dense underbrush. The chill morning air bit at their faces, but the fire burning in their hearts pushed them forward. Every snap of a twig underfoot seemed amplified in the silence, reminding them how perilous this mission was. Eleanor's grip on her rifle was tight but steady. Her mind replayed every word Harris had shared: the sprawling mercenary camp, the traps set to catch intruders, and Graves's ruthless ambition to crush anyone who dared oppose him. The stakes had never been higher. As they neared the old mine shafts, the terrain grew rougher, scarred with crumbling rocks and hidden pits. Harris moved ahead cautiously, leading them along narrow paths only he knew, avoiding tripwires and crude alarms hidden in the brush. Suddenly, the faint glow of lanterns flickered in the distance. The camp was alive, men moving with purpose, preparing for the day ahead. Eleanor's heart pounded fiercely. This was their chance. "We'll split into 2 groups," she whispered. "Colt, you and Ash take the western edge. Harris and I will circle around to the eastern side. We strike simultaneously and hit the armory first. Without their weapons, the mercenaries won't last long." Colt nodded, eyes sharp. "Understood. Stay sharp." The 2 groups melted into the shadows, creeping closer to their targets. Eleanor's breaths came in quiet, measured bursts as she and Harris skirted the perimeter. The moonlight cast eerie silhouettes on the rough wooden barracks and tents. Suddenly, a faint cough echoed nearby. Eleanor froze. A figure emerged, a young mercenary, lazily inspecting traps without suspicion. Without thinking, Eleanor raised her rifle and fired a single shot. The mercenary crumpled silently to the ground. Heart hammering, Eleanor signaled Harris to move, quickly. They darted towards the armory, where stacks of rifles, pistols, and ammunition awaited. Inside, they worked swiftly, piling explosives and setting timed fuses. Every second counted. Meanwhile, Colt and Ash silently incapacitated guards with expert precision, their combined years of experience shining through. Just as Eleanor and Harris prepared to retreat, the distant boom of the first explosion shook the camp. Chaos erupted. Shouts, gunfire, and confusion filled the air. "Now!" Eleanor hissed. The teams regrouped and sprinted back through the forest, bullets whizzing past as Graves's men scrambled to respond. Panting and bloodied but unbroken, Eleanor felt a fierce surge of hope. They had struck a heavy blow, but the war was far from over. The valley's fate hung in the balance, and every step forward was a step deeper into danger. The dust had barely settled from the explosion that ripped through Graves's camp, but the aftermath was far from calm. Eleanor crouched behind a gnarled oak, her lungs burning from the frantic run and the thick smoke that clung to the valley air. The acrid scent of gunpowder and burnt wood stung her nostrils, but what gripped her heart was the heavy silence that followed, the kind that screamed of waiting, of danger lurking in every shadow. Colt was beside her, his face grim and his rifle at the ready. "We've done damage," he whispered, "but Graves won't back down. If anything, this will only make him more dangerous." Eleanor nodded, her mind racing through the possibilities. Graves was a man who thrived on fear, on control. Destroying his weapons cache was only the first move in a game far deadlier than they had imagined. "We need to regroup, plan our next step," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. "Harris, where is the rest of the group?" Harris appeared moments later, wiping sweat from his brow. "They scattered under fire, but I managed to round most of them up near the ridge. We'll hold there for now, but Graves's men are searching." The valley. The ridge was their only sanctuary, a high ground offering a clear view of the sprawling land below and the approaching threat. As the group gathered, Eleanor could see the exhaustion etched on every face, but also the fierce determination that no amount of fear could quench. Night fell quickly in the valley, shadows swallowing the land whole. Around the campfire, plans were whispered and weapons checked. The quiet was broken by the soft crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. Eleanor tensed, hand inching toward her pistol. Out of the darkness stepped a figure cloaked in dust and secrecy. It was Clara, the woman from the nearby town whose father Graves had killed. She had managed to slip away from the mercenary patrols and find Eleanor's group. "I've come with news," Clara said breathlessly. "Graves isn't just building an army, he set a trap. Tomorrow at first light, a wagon loaded with dynamite will pass through the valley, destined for the town. If it reaches, everything will be destroyed." A cold silence fell over the group. Graves's plan was more ruthless than they had feared. Annihilation, not just control. Eleanor's eyes hardened. "We stop that wagon at all costs. If Graves thinks he can break us with fire, he's mistaken." Plans shifted swiftly. Colt and Ash would intercept the wagon, while Eleanor and Harris would distract the mercenaries guarding the eastern pass. Clara would guide the group through secret trails to avoid detection. The night was thick with tension, but also a strange sense of hope. The fight for the valley was no longer just about survival. It was about reclaiming their home, their future. As dawn painted the sky with streaks of red and gold, Eleanor's group moved silently through the rugged terrain. Every nerve was alert, every shadow a possible enemy. At the eastern pass, Eleanor and Harris lay in wait, hearts pounding. The first wagon appeared on the horizon, its wheels creaking and the horses straining against the heavy load. Suddenly, a burst of gunfire shattered the morning calm. Colt and Ash sprang into action, their rifles echoing as they fought to stop the wagon. But Graves's mercenaries were relentless, and the valley echoed with the sounds of battle, gunshots, shouts, and the crash of wood splintering. Eleanor ducked behind a boulder, taking careful aim. Her finger tightened on the trigger, eyes fixed on the chaos ahead. The fight for the valley had entered its deadliest chapter, one that would test every ounce of courage, trust, and sacrifice. Gunfire ripped through the valley like thunder cracking open the sky. Eleanor gritted her teeth as she ducked behind the rocks, dust flying up in clouds around her. Harris was crouched beside her, bleeding from a graze on his shoulder, but his hands never left his rifle. Across the ridge, the wagon carrying the dynamite teetered, its driver slumped dead, shot clean through the chest by Ash's bullet. But it was still moving, slowly, dangerously, toward the cliff edge that overlooked the town. If it toppled there, the blast would level everything below. "Colt!" Eleanor shouted. "The brakes! You need to stop the wagon!" Colt ran like a madman through the hail of bullets, weaving between fallen mercenaries and wounded allies. His coat flapped behind him like wings torn from a storm. He leapt onto the wagon from the side, grabbing the reins with one hand and reaching for the brake lever with the other. But just as his fingers brushed the metal, a shot rang out. The bullet slammed into Colt's thigh. He yelled, nearly slipping off the side, but held on. Gritting his teeth, he used all his strength to pull the lever down. The wheels screeched, the wagon groaned, and finally, it stopped. Inches from the cliff. Eleanor saw it happen and felt tears burn her eyes. Relief surged through her, but there was no time to breathe. A second wave of mercenaries came charging over the ridge. These weren't the usual thugs. These were Graves's personal enforcers. Hardened killers with scarred faces and dead eyes. Clara, standing with a rifle behind the oak trees, aimed steady and fired the first shot. One enforcer went down. Harris followed with a barrage of bullets, but they were outnumbered. "We need to pull back," Eleanor called. "Back to the gulch." Colt stumbled, blood soaking through his pants, but waved them on. "Go! I'll hold him!" Eleanor hesitated. Her heart screamed to run to him, but she knew he was buying them time. She grabbed Clara's arm and ran toward the gulch, with Harris close behind, covering their retreat. As they reached the narrow passage between the rocks, Eleanor turned back just in time to see Colt drop to one knee, his rifle still firing. Then behind him, through the smoke, emerged a figure in black. Graves. The man looked almost ghostly. Long black coat, silver revolver drawn, and a grin on his face that chilled the blood. "Well," Graves said, stepping toward Colt. "The boy who crawled out of the fire finally learned to bite." Colt raised his rifle, blood on his lips. "I'm not done yet." "Oh, but you are." Graves aimed his revolver. Bang! Colt's head jerked to the side. Not from a bullet, but from the sound of a new shot. Graves's gun flew from his hand, his shoulder exploding in red. Eleanor stood atop the ridge now, her rifle smoking. "I told you once, Graves," she called. "You don't scare me anymore." Graves growled, clutching his arm. But before he could retreat, more shots rang out, from behind. Townspeople. Dozens of them. Men and women, some with rifles, others with pitchforks or makeshift weapons. The people of the valley had risen. Ash, bruised and panting, appeared beside Colt, helping him up. Time to end this. Graves looked around, surrounded, wounded, defeated. He dropped to his knees. "You think this valley will stay free? You think you've won?" Eleanor walked slowly toward him, her eyes full of fire. "We didn't fight to win. We fought because we remembered who we are." Then, without a word, she turned away. The others closed in and disarmed the rest of Graves's men. It was over, or at least that's what they thought. As the smoke cleared and wounded were tended and the people wept with relief, no one noticed the quiet figure walking into the woods, a burned map in his hand, and Graves's insignia tattooed behind his ear. The fire wasn't out yet. It had only just begun to flicker elsewhere. The sun broke over the hills, casting a soft golden light across the battered valley. Smoke still curled from the scorched earth, and the scent of gunpowder lingered in the air. But the battle was over. The silence that followed felt sacred, earned. Colt lay against a rock, his leg bandaged and his face pale from blood loss, but his grip on Eleanor's hand never faltered. She sat beside him, her rifle across her lap, eyes scanning the ridgeline, though she knew no enemy remained. "We really did it," Clara whispered, her voice trembling as she looked around. "We held him back." Eleanor nodded slowly. "No, Clara, you held him back, all of you. The town didn't just fight, it rose." Nearby, Ash stood with Harris, both leaning on their weapons like old men who'd seen too much. They watched as townsfolk moved among the wounded, tending, praying, crying. One by one, survivors emerged from their hiding places, miners, widows, farmers, children, some with injuries, others with tears in their eyes, but Larry alive. All free. The church bell rang slowly, once, twice, echoing through the valley like a hymn. It wasn't a call to arms anymore. It was a call to rebuild. Graves had been taken away, tied and thrown in the back of an old wagon bound for the federal marshal's office. His era of terror had ended, not with a duel, but with a town standing as one. That evening, as lanterns were lit across the town, Eleanor sat by Colt's bedside in the old saloon, now turned into a makeshift clinic. He was awake, barely, with a smile tugging at his lips. "I always thought I'd die alone," he whispered. She brushed his hair back gently. "You won't. Not now. Not ever." Outside, Ash lit a match and set fire to Graves's black flag, the symbol of tyranny that once flew over the town's heart. Flames licked up the fabric until nothing remained but ash drifting into the twilight. Children laughed in the distance. Someone played a tune on a fiddle. Life, fragile but unbroken, stirred back into motion. Clara climbed the hill that night, looking down at the valley below. She held a journal in her hand, her mother's. Pages filled with stories of survival, fear, and courage. She added one more. The day we stood together. The day we stopped running. The day we chose each other over fear. And as the stars shimmered overhead and coyotes howled from faraway ridges, the valley slept for the first time in peace. But deep in the shadows of the northern hills, that quiet figure with the burned map watched the smoke rising and smiled. The story had ended. But legends never die.